We're here at McBurney Park, where children play, people walk their dogs, and the maples reach to the sky. But as the sun sets and the moon comes out, the locals simply call it Skeleton Park. You see, beneath the benches, trees, and grass lie the remains of up to 10,000 people. Join us as we investigate the legend, lore, and history of what led to a mass burial in one of Canada's oldest cities. A park where some believe the dead walk among the living.
It's been a park for quite a few years now. It was originally a cemetery that was established here probably by the 1820s at least, and it was used up until the 1850s and possibly into the 1860s, at which time it was closed. It was actually derelict for quite some time until 1893, when complaints about the condition of the cemetery were so enormous, and the city decided to actually do something about that, and it was decided to make it into a park. The earliest map that the Garrison Burial Ground appears on is that 1814 to 1816 period. So we don't have any evidence prior to that. We know it does relate only to the British period and British occupation, and that essentially starts in the 1780s. 1783 is when the British occupation begins here. So we know it cannot date any earlier than that.
The first remains that were buried here were thought to have been soldiers. There was a garrison in this area, and there was a number of epidemics that Kingston was afflicted by. The biggest ones were 1832 to 1834. An estimated 10% of Kingstonians died. And 1847, an estimated 50,000 Irish came through Kingston. They were fleeing what's known as Angorta Moor, or the Great Hunger, also known as the Potato Famine. An estimated 300 Kingstonians died helping the Irish, who were carrying the typhus at that time, and they were buried in this area. Between 1813 and 1865, there were an estimated 10,000 remains buried in this area. Many of them, or most of them, were either Irish or Scottish, and that was a direct reflection of the Kingston community at that time.
The original name, when it was actually turned into the park, was Frontenac Park, and the name was changed to McBurney named after the first principal, I think it was the first principal of Central Public School. But its traditional name around Kingston is actually Skeleton Park. I'm not absolutely sure when the last burial was. We know they certainly slowed down in the 1850s, but there may have been some in the 1860s, but certainly by 1864 there were no more burials in the cemetery.
So it was decided in 1893 to actually turn this area into a park. The remains were to be removed up to either Cataraqui Cemetery or St. Mary's Cemetery. There were several conditions laid out as to how the area was dealt with. Headstones were to be laid low. There was to be no walks over any of the remains, and there were several other conditions attached to this area becoming a park. One of those, in fact, was that a commemoration monument was to be erected as well.
The center of it's always changed. Like when we were younger, the center of the park was almost like a dome with rocks. So it was all done so the rocks were flat, so you could ride right over it with your bike. That's why I remember it was flat, because you could just ride right on over it. And then they redid it so the rocks stuck out over top of the mortar, so you couldn't ride over it. So because I think kids got hurt doing it, maybe that's why they did it. I don't know, but they changed it. But more kids got hurt on it when it got. You know what I mean? So it doesn't make sense. Why would they dig it up? We used to hear rumors that was where they threw the mass amount of bodies in the park. That was the pit where they put all the cholera and the victims from that. That's what we heard. And then later on, they dug it up twice. Why would they do that? And they never said anything. They never stated anything. The only thing that we ever really saw was the man that was dug up on the corner of the park. We could see his coffin. We were younger, we went over there and looked at that. That was like one of the big big things about Skeleton Park because we never believed it when we were kids. Like, yeah, right, it was a graveyard. And then sure enough, they dig up a coffin on the side of the road and you're like, yeah, it was a graveyard.
It became a park in 1893, so it is over 100 years old. And certainly it's well used. We see it very well used as a park. And I would think, based on the historical information we've looked at from that time period, from 1893 and the period when they were changing it over, it certainly was something that residents were pleased with and were glad to see happen because the cemetery was in such disrepair at that time.
A Mr. Adfit was contracted by the city to remove the remains. However, the work stopped in 1894 for several reasons. Two of the main reasons were that one of the conditions laid out by the city was that a family had to request remains be removed to one of those two cemeteries. However, one of the difficulties with epidemics is that several times whole families would have been wiped out, so there were no relatives to ask for the remains to be moved to one of the other two cemeteries. The other reason is that in that time period it was thought that disease was spread by air. So there was a great concern whenever these graves were opened that the diseases would in fact spread to local people.
When it's foggy out and misty out, it smells a sewer rotten stank. And it's not sewer gas because I've smelled sewer gas before. It's something else. And it's nasty. And you can smell it. Especially, I notice it's by the cannon. Really bad. That's where it ranks the most to me. I would guess it's the bodies in the park that they didn't take because that was the story and it's true. It has to be true because they found a man on the side of the road. If they took the bodies, then the man wouldn't be in the side of the road.
There certainly was concern that was expressed as to whether or not there would be problems with diseases coming out of the ground. We have to remember that at that time, which was 1893, certainly medical advances were not the way they are today. There was still not a lot of knowledge as to how these diseases were picked up, how different people got sick and others did not get sick. There was a lot of uncertainty about that, and certainly the concern was there. However, we know now that that probably was unfounded and there was no danger of spreading any of these diseases through the community.
Quite often with contagious diseases, people were buried as quickly as possible. So it's not unusual all along the St. Lawrence there to find that there are unmarked graves. Certainly all along the Rideau Canal, there's unmarked graves all the way along there. Contagious diseases were not well understood, and people couldn't be buried fast enough, and it was not unusual for immigrants to be buried in unmarked graves.
Ever since we were kids, all the time in the yard, we'd always go out there and we'd be digging for treasure, or for kids, we'd find something. We'd always find bones, and they looked like human bones, like thigh bones. They were that big around, that long. You don't find bones like that big. They were really strange. We'd always bring them in and be like, "What's this?" And they're like, "Are these human bones?" They'd be like, "No, go throw that out and back." And now that I think about it, it's I should have kept that. I'm like, that's definitely not a dog or animal bone. That's something else.
At the time the burials took place, which was over several decades, the individual churches would have kept records of the burials. And at the time when it was turned into a park, there was supposed to have been a plan made to actually locate all of the burials and count them. But certainly we know from the work that was carried out during the exhumations that there were many more here. So whether or not accurate records were kept historically, it's doubtful. And what happened to those records, whether they are complete or not, we do not know. But that's something that could still be looked at. It would take a lot of time to look at all the different church records and count the number of burials that should have taken place here. One of the difficulties is that they don't necessarily specify which cemetery they were buried in, so we could only make assumptions as to whether they were in the upper burial ground or in one of the others that was still in operation at the time.
It was in fact in 1894 when the remains, some of the remains, were dug up and moved to Cataraqui or St Mary's Cemetery. It did in fact leave an estimated 9,000 still in this area.
When people were buried in 19th century cemeteries, certainly space was at a premium. In Kingston, that was potentially a problem because we know here we have very shallow soils, and so certainly throughout the historical record in other places, we know that bodies were stacked in cemeteries. When you're dealing with limited space, that is always an issue, and we are presuming, certainly from the 1893 exhumations, we have information from those records that suggest there was stacking going on in this cemetery, and certainly it would seem like it would be the type of situation where that might have occurred.
Oh, my cat, he'll growl all the time at just nothing. It's weird. It's like he'll jump up in the window, grrr, or he'll go to my back door. That's what really creeps me out. I'm just like, okay. Look out in the yard, turn the lights on. There's nothing there. Okay. It's all right. But I've noticed dogs too, like my aunt's dog. I've noticed them bark at just nothing, or dogs go off at nothing in the park, and it's just kind of weird. I just think it's the energy follows me sometimes, though, because just weird things occur around me, and that energy of that park, living around it, I think kind of I've almost, the spirits know that I've always been there, so they kind of have a friendship, I think, with me, maybe. I don't know.
It was decided to hold an investigation at the park. The crew gathered their gear and prepared for the night ahead. They were asked what they hoped to see and how they felt about being at Skeleton Park after sunset.
I hope to see ghosts.
I'm not a believer myself, but I'm open to new ideas.
I'm not scared. I will be when I go home, though, because I live alone.
There's usually explanations for any unusual stuff, sound, pictures. Actually, everything is subjective, I think.
I've had my experiences in the past, so I know there's a possibility of something out there.
Karen, a spiritual medium, had no prior knowledge of the history of the location. She was invited to attend the investigation in hopes she might connect with the spirits who call Skeleton Park home.
It's like there's confusion under the ground. Nothing is orderly. And I just keep seeing a jumble of people. Like I keep seeing, arms and legs and everything all just as if they were thrown in. I can get glimpses. It's almost as if you were trying to capture something with a train going by, trying to capture the faces as they're going by, The people involved, there aren't many that actually got to move on in the afterlife.
And so they're still earthbound?
Yeah, and it's like a cesspool of despair and confusion, and it's like a self-made prison. It's almost like somebody just covered them up quickly just to, keep the animals away or something. There wasn't much time or maybe the manpower for proper burials, which is really sad.
The park is in such close proximity to those houses, if you look right behind you.
Yes.
Do you think that the houses are affected at all? Do you think that they're
Yes.
getting any sense of what's in the park?
Well, they may not be consciously aware of it, but those kind of vibes affect everything in a close proximity. I mean, the animals will feel it in the park. The trees will feel it. Certainly the people who live in this area, and certainly if there were, remains found when they had built the house, it would affect the people in it. It makes you want to go door to door and ask them how their lives are, but it probably wouldn't show much, just be the same as anywhere else. But no, you would feel it. I mean, I can feel it. It's almost like a layer of paint on the houses. It's a sadness, it's a weighing down. It's not so much scary and negative as it is just so sad.
Now, I had a young lady who is actually a local resident on the street, and we spoke with Melinda, and she was stating that her family home was originally an old hotel which showed on the Upper Canada map. Now it's burnt down. It was at the top of York and Ordnance Streets, and apparently they had a lot of occurrences in that house, and subsequently her family actually lives all along the street. They have a row of houses, and they still find that there are occurrences happening. Could you explain?
It's going to take a long time before this park is just a park.
So do you think it affects the people that are living in there? Are they feeling sadness? Do you think that they're getting that sense?
I think that people who are sensitive, prone, would feel it. There are some people that could have a ghost right beside them and they'd be totally unaware of it. So it's those people that are sensitive. So you have people who are emotionally frail or sick, that kind of thing. It could make you more prone, to depression. It's like a dumping ground for people who died. This was probably the grave pit, not the graveyard. But, so they probably just threw them in with the rest of them. And it gets less and less as you leave the park. Yes, you see, there's these impressions here. You see where it sinks down? That's what happens when somebody's buried improperly. See the impressions? Like, that's the kind of thing. And there's one down there, and this is just being dramatic, and that has nothing to do with the burial thing, but it's that feeling. I feel like there's a lot right here. And as soon as I arrived at this park, I was pulled right here.
Really?
Yeah. And as soon as I got here, it was almost the first time I actually felt the energy. It almost just made my knees buckle. Yeah. I want to go over closer to where I felt this, if I can, just for a moment,
Sure,
okay?
Yeah, that's good.
A depression is when the flesh has left and there's only bones there, so there's less space required for the body.
Oh.
So it would go down, like sometimes in old graveyards when the box has deteriorated. It might have been a wooden box or something, and the flesh is gone. Then all you've got are the bones, so the earth just tends to settle.
Wow.
Yeah. It's even worse here.
Really?
Yeah, it's awful.
You'd think that the playground would actually bring out good feelings.
Well, it's
you're
better
getting the
than
opposite.
nothing. Yeah, that's yeah. Well, it's the spirit is overwhelming. It almost made me feel nausea. Like that's how strong it is. In some ways, the playground is almost as if it's ignoring how terrible it is under the ground. So it's a beautiful thing in one sense to try and make it into a light experience, but I mean, it's as if your grandfather's grave, they put a swing set on it or something,
Mm-hmm.
It's just, it's a good attempt, and it's certainly a beautiful place, and the community really needs it, and they use it a lot, and that's a great thing, but it doesn't override it,
Did you want to actually go up into the park area there?
Sure. It's right here. I got quite a special, it was like just sadness, just something just pulled the joy right out of me here. Their spirits are just pulling on me, just pulling. It'd be like a drowning person trying to get a hold of something, even a twig to keep them afloat, you know.
Do you feel that, are they happy about the park and the children
Yes.
being here, or do they not like that?
They get glimpses of it. It's not like they're as aware of it as, say, another spirit might be. Say, somebody who had walked through here and had a heart attack and died, they would have the clarity likely to say, oh my goodness, there's children playing where I died, and that's beautiful. They get glimpses of it, almost like an abstract painting. So they're seeing that, and that just sort of adds to their confusion. It gives them a moment of beauty, but it doesn't last, you know. It just adds to the confusion. It was like, here's some more, throw them in because we're afraid of disease, that kind of thing. Get them in the ground as fast as you can. And I guess it would depend on the time of year. If there was a lot of heat and, things like that, it could really pose a problem. But I get the feeling like the bodies are just thrown in because they're all just lying there intermixed almost,
So they're entangled.
And yes, and it's almost like it was a desperation thing to do it like this because there were so many of them that they just couldn't, it's like after a big disaster, sometimes they just can't be careful with each one. They've got to throw them in a pit and cover them up quick.
Do you think the bodies are within the park, or do you think they stretch beyond?
I mean, it did radiate out, but it was more, this was the heart of it. I wouldn't be surprised if other bodies had been found while they've been trying to build houses and so on here. But they weren't as concentrated as they are here. There were a lot of people shoveling, and they didn't have much gear to work with, so they weren't that deep.
So you feel that they're close to the surface?
Oh yeah, I could just feel it right up through my legs. It was like they had been disturbed since they had been buried the first time, and somebody had tried to make some order out of it, and it was such a mess that somebody just said, look, this is crazy, Well, where are we going to put all these people? We'll dig a big pit. So you have all the unemployed in the area coming around to work on the pit. And what a nasty job. And they had to hurry, because everybody would have gotten some disease or another. And I think for a while people were on wells, if they were close, I got the feeling there weren't houses that were close at the time, but it would have gone into the well water,
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a bad thought.
Yes, it is. But you wouldn't originally have had to have dug down any farther than 2 feet, and you would have gotten through. It was just enough just to cover them and keep disease away.
Do you think the spirits are happy about the children playing in the park?
The state of unrest, I'm surprised that, that the vibes are good enough for children to play happily, and all these nice houses surrounding it and everything. It's a beautiful park, but life goes on, I guess, eh? This is about as close as they'd get to a headstone.
You're feeling headstones?
Yeah. It's like these rocks were covered at some point, perhaps when they were putting paths in or something, or the play equipment, and they came across these rocks. It's like they were down there suffering with the rest of them, They get stuck in the mode of the goriness of the situation and the fear of the situation and the shock of passing over and never quite believing that there was a life after death. So they're confused and depressed and stuck. Each person is like an isolated occurrence, and it's up to them to arrive at freedom themselves. Whenever somebody stirs up your bones, somewhere within you, you feel it. So if somebody disturbs your remains, you're aware of it.
Do you think the restoration of the park makes a difference?
There's been every effort made to make this as pleasant as possible, and most people that would come here, if they felt something, they'd think it was in their own mind, which is sad in its own. That's what I mean, it reverberates on and on and on. It's like a magnet. It's like a great big sore, and it's going to take a lot of positive energy to heal it. And that's why maybe in time, but there's some places on earth that just don't ever heal.
After Karen had enlightened us about the spirits, I decided it was time to disclose some of the facts about the park. There's 10,000 people underneath of us, approximately. And there's between some caskets they found with 11 bodies in them. And
God!
And some they'd find empty. And those empty ones, they figured that grave robbers came to steal the bodies for medical.
Yes, that makes sense.
So there was a lot of that, but when Mr. Adstead actually went digging and stuff, he found some of the graves were actually waterlogged and partially decomposed because of the type of soil that we have.
You're saying there were 10,000?
There's 10,000 underneath of us, approximately.
That was a heck of a burial ground.
Yeah, it was called Garrison Burial Ground. They've been arguing about the actual size of the park for a long time. Before we knew it, our long, cold investigation of McBurney Park was over. We packed our gear and let the spirits be, leaving Skeleton Park to rest again. Footage revealed anomalies that some believed to be orbs, yet others would consider it dust, bugs, or lens flare. You decide.